5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you again, Chairman Lowenthal, for holding this hearing today. And I want to try to focus back on the bipartisan legislation at hand. As has been said, my colleagues chose to introduce the exact same legislation as I did. And I think that shows we still agree on the policy and need to be working together in a way that gives it the best chance possible to be signed into law. We need to get this bill signed into law because clean energy generation is the future. The Biden administration has committed to that future by setting the goal to achieve 100% carbon pollution-free power on our grid by 2035. Our public lands can and should be part of that 2035 goal. And Florida, along with the provisions of the bill that became law last year, will ensure that responsible renewable development takes place on our federal lands. As my colleagues have highlighted, Florida would direct the Bureau of Land Management to establish priority areas for solar, wind, and geothermal development on federal lands. These are areas where development would not conflict with other important uses like conservation and recreation. The designations would be similar to the process that BLM carried out in Southern California to establish the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, or DRECP. Additionally, the bill would direct the federal government to distribute the revenues from wind and solar projects to the states and counties in which federal lands development takes place, as well as to federal land management agencies to assist with permitting. Revenues would also be sent to a new fund to support conservation and recreation. Importantly, these new revenue distribution streams will give relevant stakeholders skin in the game when we responsibly develop clean energy projects. Further, due to the bipartisan efforts last year, the bill was significantly strengthened and improved. In fact, the wind and solar industries were happy to give us their endorsement for the first time ever. Thanks to these improvements, the bill was passed through the House twice, and several new additions to the bill were finally signed into law. One of these provisions establishes a Renewable Energy Coordination Office at the Department of the Interior. Unfortunately, this office was disbanded under the previous administration, which often ignored the need to expeditiously and thoroughly review proposed renewable energy projects for public lands. I'm hopeful that with this new office, the Biden administration will be able to reduce permitting delays while still fully evaluating each project. Secondly, we were able to set a national goal to permit at least 25 gigawatts of wind, solar, and geothermal projects on our federal lands by 2025. And lastly, we gave the Bureau of Land Management the authority to modify acreage rental rates and capacity fees if existing rates exceed fair market value or are not competitive with other land. This provision is similar to the agency's authorities that govern fossil fuel development. As the department reviews its existing renewable energy policies, I've strongly encouraged the Bureau of Land Management to exercise this authority, and I will continue to do so. While our development on public lands needs to be smart, it also needs to be feasible in the existing market. Last year's progress was only a first step. The Public Land Renewable Energy Act of 2021 includes a number of updates and improvements to reflect continued feedback we've received. In particular, I'd highlight that we exempted the DRECP from review until 2030 to recognize the collaborative process that went into its creation and to ensure BLM directs its resources to areas that have not yet been reviewed. Mr. Gosar included all of these same updates and improvements in his version of the legislation. So I'm pleased that H.R. 3326, in fact, is bipartisan legislation, and I hope to add Republican co-sponsors in the days and weeks ahead. I'm proud of the bill we have today, and I look forward to moving it through the legislative process. With that, I'll turn to questions. Ms. Culver, as I mentioned, I believe the administration must make sure that smart renewable energy development on public lands is cost competitive so we can meet President Biden's clean energy goals. I've heard from some renewable developers that the cost of developing on public lands often doesn't reflect fair market value. What action is the Bureau of Land Management taking to address the high cost of rents and fees for wind and solar projects on our public lands?
Thank you for that question. Our regulations currently provide for adjustments due to hardship that may be imposed. In addition, the Energy Act of 2020 gave us new authority to look at fair market value, whether or not the amount of fees are competitive, and in addition, a broader authority to look at adjustments that might be needed to promote the greatest use of our wind and solar resources. We're looking at that and including some of this authority through an ongoing formal rulemaking, but also looking at opportunities to apply that case by case and that interim policy that might address it now.
Well, thank you much, Ms. Culver. And I am out of time, but again, I want to reiterate my only goal is to get this bill signed into law. And all are invited to co-sponsor this legislation after it's introduced. And with that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Levin.